We are here to teach you about the institutions of government. There are three major institutions within the government of the United States. Think of it as a three-legged stool. Each leg does its own part to hold up its duties within the government. A stool with two legs or one leg would topple over because it would have no balance. This is exactly what would happen to the government if just one or two groups were in charge. That is why the framers introduced the separation of powers, which created three distinct branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. This separation of powers and the concept of checks and balances between the powers was introduced in Federalist Paper 51. By separating the government's tasks and duties between multiple branches, the nation is protected from one group or one person getting too powerful. Allowing the branches to check one another protects the nations from the tyrannical abuses that sometimes occur in governments. In this video, we are going to break down each institution, the specialized tasks, and discuss the checks and balances of each.
Let's start with the legislative branch. The body that makes up the legislative portion of government is called Congress. Within Congress, there are two smaller bodies which were created thanks to the Great Compromise, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Each of these entities are different and have their own separate duties. The House of Representatives consists of 435 members with 2-year terms. Members of the House have always been directly elected by the people of their states. This body is very formal and there are many rules about debate. A state is given seats in the House based on population. Therefore, a more populous state like California has more members than Vermont. When the Great Compromise was made, the system of the House pleased states with more people because they had a greater say. The House has the power to start impeachment proceedings of elected officials and also begins all bills of revenue. The elected representative also tends to do what he or she thinks their people would want. The second body within the legislative branch is the Senate. The Senate consists of 100 members, 2 from each state. These members serve 6-year terms. At the start of America's democracy, senators were not elected by the people, but rather chosen by the state legislators. However, in 1913, the 17th Amendment was ratified, which allowed for the process of direct elections of senators. This body as a whole is less formal in debates. For example, senators can filibuster, which means one may talk and talk to delay or prevent a vote on a proposed bill. The Senate holds impeachment trials, confirms the president's nominations, ratifies treaties, and conducts investigations. As a whole, the legislative branch's main duty is to create laws for America. Now onto the judicial branch, the body of government whose main job is to interpret the Constitution in regards to judicial rulings. In the federal court system, there are 3 main tiers of federal courts. The lowest tier is the U.S. District Courts, comprised of 94 district courts nationwide. Within the district courts, they have original jurisdiction of civil and criminal cases, meaning that they have the right to hear those cases first. The second tier is the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. With 9 total courts, they have appellate jurisdiction, meaning that they hear cases on appeal. A case that is appealed is one that comes up through the district court, where that person who lost that case attempts to explain why the lower court made an error and why they are actually correct. One can do this using a writ of certiorari. The third and highest tier of federal courts is the U.S. Supreme Court, having appellate jurisdiction as well as the courts below them. There is only one Supreme Court, and whatever they rule cannot be changed or negotiated against. Whatever they rule trumps all other lower court rulings. After a Supreme Court decision is made, a precedent is set. A precedent sets an expectation for all courts to follow in similar cases. For example, Roe v. Wade has set a precedent for many other abortion cases in courts all throughout the nation. Within the federal courts, judges serve for life. They are appointed by the president and can only become a judge if the Senate approves of their nominations with a 2/3 vote. By interpreting the words of the Constitution, judicial rulings can shape the law and social culture in many different ways. The last section of the United States federal government we will discuss is the executive branch. The executive branch houses the face of the United States, the president. It also contains the vice president, executive departments, independent agencies, and other committees. The main duty of the executive branch is to enforce and carry out laws made by Congress. The president has many duties specific to him. He acts as the chief of state, chief executive, chief diplomat, commander-in-chief, legislative leader, chief of party, and guardian of the economy. In order to fulfill these many roles, he appoints cabinet members and White House staff to assist and advise him in his decisions. There are many departments and agencies within the executive branch. There are 15 primary executive departments within the cabinet. Some examples include the Department of State and the Department of Defense. These agencies advise the president with their expertise in their specific field. The Department of State advises the president on international relations, while the Department of Defense helps the president make decisions dealing with national security and the United States Armed Forces. There are also independent agencies. Although these agencies are not directly controlled by the president, they help to regulate industries or provide social services for the U.S. Some examples of independent agencies are the Central Intelligence Agency and the Federal Election Commission. The CIA gives information to the president regarding security threats to the nation. The FEC supervises and enforces campaign finances in United States elections. Another section within the executive branch is the White House staff, whose number varies depending on the president, but main duty of assisting and advising the president stays constant. White House staff are selected and hired by the president without any say from Congress. The president, vice president, and the many agencies within the executive branch work together to enforce laws made by the legislative branch all throughout the nation.
Within the federal government, a system exists called checks and balances to guarantee that the three institutions of government have certain regulations and exceptions over one another to ensure that not one body is too powerful. It keeps the federal government balanced. This idea of checks and balances was developed by the framers of the Constitution, highlighting those certain regulations and powers the different branches of each government have over each other. The idea of a proper checks and balance system is further highlighted in Federalist 51, which dives into why the checks and balance system described in the Constitution is necessary for proper government and for that government to be successful. Specifically, within the legislative branch, certain checks they have over the executive is that they can override a presidential veto, ratify treaties, confirm executive appointments, and impeach and remove federal officials within the executive branch. Over the judicial branch, Congress can impeach and remove judges, create amendments to overrule judicial decisions, and approve or reject judicial appointments. Within the executive branch, certain checks they have over the legislative branch include the power to veto laws, the power to negotiate foreign treaties, propose laws, and make appointments to Congress. Checks over the judicial branch is that the president appoints judges and grants pardons to federal offenders. Some powers the judicial branch has over the legislative branch is that they can declare acts of legislation made by Congress unconstitutional. And this is similar to the way the judicial branch checks the executive branch, in that the judiciary can declare executive actions unconstitutional as well.
Thank you for listening. G
And MB are out. Have a good summer, Mr. Haynes.